Dr. Fung, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
When we think about people around us, it could be our family, it could be our friends. We probably know somebody that is overweight, severely overweight, or has a metabolic disease like diabetes, cancer, dementia, even heart disease. And we're told there's nothing that we can do about it. So, Dr. Fung, my first question, let's talk about losing weight, fixing obesity. What is the biggest cause of obesity?
Um, Essentially, I think that the problem is hyperinsulinemia, which is really a hormonal issue. And this comes down to a lot of people will say, well, it's about too many calories or something like that. However, I think that doesn't really address the actual underlying problem because the thing is that our bodies respond to hormones, right? So if we're gaining body fat, then it's because the hormones have signaled us to gain body fat. Really, every single system in our body works the same way. Nothing happens by accident. And it's because in order for us to, regulate this very highly complex system, which has lots of interconnections, everybody has to know what's happening with everything else. So insulin is a hormone that essentially tells us to store body fat. That's sort of its job, right? So when you eat, the hormone insulin is going to rise, and therefore that's a signal for us to store some of it as body fat, which is essentially a store of calories, right? So it doesn't happen by accident. Everybody has this mistaken notion that we have a certain amount that we put in, a certain amount that we put, that we burn, and any excess goes into fat. And that part that goes into fat is completely unregulated. But it's simply not true. It's actually completely inconceivable that the body works that way. And the reason is that for most of us, the body weight stays stable. For example, if you think about weight gain, the average over the last 30, 40 years, really, even with this entire obesity epidemic, is about a pound a year. A pound of body fat is about 3,500 calories, which is about 2 days worth of eating, which means that our bodies we have to match the amount of calories we eat with calories we burn to within like a 99%, failure rate, right? Like there can be essentially no errors. Yet we don't know how many calories we eat and how many calories we burn. So how can you maintain it within a 99% sort of accuracy without that? So this idea that it's simply some unregulated dump of calories is not true. So if you think about it that way, then what happens is people just say, oh, you eat less calories, which is just not useful advice. And I don't know why people think it's useful. Like that's the same advice that we've been giving for 25, 35 years, and it really hasn't helped anybody. You look at the number of people who have had struggled with it, and essentially all of them have done calorie counting, and it doesn't work. So it's not understanding that it's not calories because our bodies respond to hormones. There is certain calories are going to stimulate insulin more than other calories. So if you eat cookies, you're going to stimulate insulin more, which means you're going to store more of that as body fat, which simply means, and you compare that to an egg, for example, then you don't stimulate as much insulin, which means you don't store as much of those calories as fat, and you burn more of those calories, right? That's all that happens. And the whole idea, which is simply that we're just saying that some foods are more fattening than other foods, right? So cookies are more fattening than broccoli or eggs, which isn't really that far a stretch. Like how many people do you really have said, well, I got fat because I ate too much broccoli, right? Like, come on, never, right? But if you say, oh, I eat too much cookies, sure, that could totally gain to make you I take too many chips. I made too many, too much junk food, too much fast food, sure, candy, any of that. But oh, I ate too much salmon. It's like, I don't know. I don't know that that's actually a reason. So it's not calories. It's really the insulin. And if you think about weight gain, obesity as a excess of insulin, then you can say, well, how do you lower insulin, right? Because that sets you on the right track. And that means to say that, well, you want to eat foods that don't stimulate as much insulin, as in eat more food that's less fattening for you. Which again, if you simply go back, to the 60s and 70s, you could find all this advice in all the popular media, right? Like, don't eat cookies if you want to eat weight. Cut out the starchy foods, cut out the sugary foods, cut out the desserts, cut out the snacks, right? And it's very simple. But see, the thing about hyperinsulinemia. So if you think about insulin, is a hormone that tells your body to gain weight. That's its job. The problem is that you have too much of it. And the reason you have too much of it is because you're eating foods that stimulate it more than it should. But you can also see that a lot of the diseases that follow along are also diseases of too much insulin. So type 2 diabetes is also a disease where it's very easy to measure. You measure insulin levels, they're sky high. The disease is that you have too much insulin. So therefore you have to lower it. And if obesity and type 2 diabetes then lead to all those other diseases like heart attacks and strokes and all those other things. And again, you can follow the medical literature, and you can see hyperinsulinemia is a huge risk factor for all kinds of diseases, including cancers, including heart disease and all that. So a lot of these diseases are diseases of sort of hyperinsulinemia, which come back down to not simply eating too many calories. That's not the issue. Like, you eat a lot of broccoli, like you can eat excessive amounts of broccoli, like calories like broccoli, and you simply won't gain weight, right? Because other things will happen. Your body's going to adjust, because if you're not stimulating the insulin, you're eating all those calories, well, your body's going to burn it, right? It's not going to store it because you didn't tell it to store it. And because of that, then you're going to want to stop eating it because your body has natural satiety mechanisms. Whereas if you store it, and this is the thing, I don't really understand how these calorie people don't understand this. Suppose you eat a food that is very stimulating for insulin. So you eat, white bread and jam, right? Lots of sugar, lots of refined carbohydrates. So we know that the minute you eat that food, that you can eat, say, 100 calories of that compared to 100 calories of an egg. The difference is that the white bread and jam is going to spike your insulin through the roof, whereas the egg is not, right? So you have to pretend that those calories, that hormones simply don't matter for our body, which is obviously a very difficult thing to reconcile. However, if you say, okay, that insulin, you take 100 calories, insulin spikes way high, okay, with the white bread and jam. That's going to tell your body to store all of those calories. So now those 100 calories goes directly into fat stores, because that's how your body stores calories. Well, if all of that went into your stores, you have nothing left, right, to use for energy. So you eat that white bread and jam, if a few hours later, your body's like, I have no energy because everything's stored away. I can't use it. So therefore, it's going to make you want to go eat, which is exactly what happens, of course. So you eat that white bread and jam, which is all refined carbs. Then by 10:30, you're just ravenous. You're looking for something else to eat, right? Whereas you eat that egg, your body didn't store that much of it as calories, so therefore it's burning it, and it's not going and you're not going to need to eat at 10:30. So it's like, all these people say it's all about calories, all about calories. Like, what are you talking about, right? What happens to those calories the minute you put them in your mouth is completely different depending on what the hormones tell it to do. So why do you pretend that it's completely irrelevant? And by ignoring that sort of physiology of what happens to food and hormones in our body, they sort of set up this entire thing where everybody's just sort of counting calories, so they're eating these foods, but they're not watching what's happening after that. A lot of it gets stored away. So therefore, at the same time that they're storing all this excess, body fat, because it's a store of calories, they're ravenously hungry and wondering, why am I so hungry? It's like, well, because you didn't sort of fix that whole problem where you need to use, instead of storing energy, you want to use the energy. So the whole thing is sort of misguided, and it's always a little bit, I always get a little discouraged that people don't there's no effort to make people have people understand this, right? All the sort of, you talk to any so-called experts or dietitians and doctors and stuff, and it's all about calories, 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 calories. Well, why don't you pay attention to what type of calories? So a lot of kidney disease is caused by type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes is essentially quite simple to understand. It's basically your body has too much sugar. Remember that glucose. When we talk about sugar, you don't talk about table sugar, but and that's a glucose and fructose, which is sucrose. But sugar is a generic term that includes glucose. So if you eat carbohydrates like bread, starchy foods, basically. Starches are long chains of glucose, which is a sugar, right? So when your body has too much glucose, then it can store some of it, but then eventually it spills out of the blood. Your blood glucose, which is your blood sugar, goes up, and you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which is really the biggest cause of kidney disease in the United States and Canada. Then, of course, we've had this big epidemic of obesity, then an epidemic of type 2 diabetes, which is leading to more kidney disease. So a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago, I was very, I started to really question what I had been taught, which is that type 2 diabetes is a chronic and progressive disease. And I realized that it wasn't. It was actually just a lie. And it was funny because at the same time that every diabetes association in the world, what doctors were being taught, what dietitians were being taught, what the American Diabetes Association had there on the website was it's a chronic and progressive disease. Everybody knew it was a lie because if you lost weight, your diabetes would either get better or go away. So to me, it was this horrifying sort of divide between what the sort of authorities were saying, which was a complete fabrication and very harmful to people, right? You tell them that they can't do anything about it, they won't do anything about it, right? You should be telling them they can do something about it and telling them how. So there's this horrifying divide between what the medical authorities were saying and what was the truth. And the truth is that it was a reversible disease, but you had to focus on weight loss. So I got very interested in that question of weight loss, which is how I sort of started really thinking about that entire problem of calories, because I had believed it was all about calories for so long as well. But it simply wasn't true. It didn't hold up to any rigorous thinking about the problem. And this whole problem of weight gain was more of a hormonal issue, and if you fix that, and there are various ways you can fix that. Changing the diet is probably the best way, but also using things like intermittent fasting as a tool could be very effective. Then you can reverse the type 2 diabetes, and as I started to implement it in my clinic, I actually saw the most sort of amazing results. It was like, for example, one fellow, I'd been treating him for like 10 years, and he had type 2 diabetes, and he was very rigorous. He wanted to get better, but I had given him sort of the standard but wrong advice. Then I told him, okay, well, what you need to do is restrict your carbohydrates. If your body has too much glucose, why are you eating glucose, right? That doesn't make any sense. So if you think about type 2 diabetes, your blood glucose or blood sugar is high. We know that certain foods will raise your blood glucose. If you eat bread, you're eating glucose because it's a starch, so it's glucose, and therefore your blood glucose goes up. If you eat an equivalent amount of calories, say of an egg, which is proteins and fats, you're not eating glucose, you're eating amino acids and triglycerides. So certain foods will raise your blood glucose, certain foods don't raise your blood glucose. So why were you eating foods that raise your blood glucose? It didn't make any sense, but that was the standard advice. So I told him to do that. I told him that you could use intermittent fasting because if you don't eat, your body will simply burn off that glucose and your blood glucose will get better. And he was on like 100 units plus of insulin. And, I simply made a few changes to his diet, and within a month, I swear he came off all of diabetic medications, and his A1C went down to like 5.9, which actually classified him as a non-diabetic, which is sort of insane. Like, to me, it was sort of eye-opening that I had treated this fellow so incredibly incorrectly. And it was a standard way that everybody's treating him. Like, he had other specialists, other doctors who were treating him the exact same way. But nevertheless, it was a patient that I treated that really had been done a very big disservice not having known that information. So that's where I started to write about it. And I was like, oh, wow, this is like sort of insane. So I wrote about it in the diabetes code, which was about how you could actually reverse type 2 diabetes. And that got published in 2018. It wasn't until 2021 that the American Diabetes Association finally said that it's a disease that can be reversed. There's criteria for remission. It's a reversible disease. It's like, goodness, it took, you know, all this time and me calling it the biggest lie in type 2 diabetes for them to finally admit what was pretty obvious to anybody who would think about it. Like, I don't think anybody really thought about it for a long time. Or if they did, they simply went with a consensus, which is, again, slightly horrifying to me. So if you eat, say, that food, the insulin is going to go up. And insulin is a hormone. It's a natural hormone. Everybody says I'm trying to demonize it. I'm not. It's a natural hormone. But the issue is that if it's too high, it's bad. If it's too low, it's bad. And that's no different than any other hormone. Thyroid hormone. If it's too high, it's bad. If it's too low, it's bad. I'm not saying that thyroid hormone is bad for you, but you want to have it in the normal range. So insulin's job, it has many jobs, but one of its jobs is to tell you to store energy. And this is a survival mechanism, obviously. So if you're, a caveman or cavewoman and food is scarce and stuff, so when you eat, you want to be able to store some of that. So your body will store that in the form of body fat. It's a store of calories, sort of no more and no less, but it's regulated. That is, the hormones tell you when to put it in and when to take it out. So when insulin goes up, you simply tell your body that you want to take the calories that you're eating right now, and you want to store some of it away for future use, which is smart, right? And it turns off fat burning and it turns off sugar burning. So, your body has two sources of energy: glucose, which is sugar, and fat. Okay, so you can store sugar in the form of glycogen in the liver, and you can store fat in the form of body fat. When insulin goes up, what happens is that you stop burning glucose and you stop burning fat. So insulin inhibits lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat, and it inhibits glycolysis, which is the glycogenolysis, which is the breaking down of glycogen. So you basically stop burning sugar, you stop burning fat, and you store it, right? So that's sensible. If you're eating it, then you don't want to use your stores. You want to, because you're putting it in, not taking it out. So essentially, when you're eating, you're storing calories. That's what insulin is telling you to do. If the food that you eat shoots your insulin way up high, you're going to store more of it. If your insulin goes down, only then can you actually burn those sugar and fat, which are those stores of calories. Because when insulin goes down, your body senses, okay, so I'm not getting food anymore, so I have no source of energy coming in. I need to use my own stores of energy and burn it. Right? So not difficult. When you eat, insulin goes up, you store energy. When insulin is down, which happens when you don't eat, then that's when you burn calories in the form of sugar or fat. So therefore, if you really want to burn fat, you simply cannot have insulin way high. Because you're fighting yourself all the time. So even if you cut your calories, but you keep your insulin levels very high, you can't burn those calories. So what happens? So say you eat 2,000 calories. Normally you burn 2,000 calories. Now you drop it to 1,500 calories going in. But you keep insulin levels very high because you're eating, very high carbohydrate foods. You're snacking all the time. You're eating all the time. Well, if you're only taking in 1,500, but you can't burn sugar, you can't burn your stores of fat, what's going to happen? Well, the only way you can balance this equation of 1,500 going in and 2,000 going out is for you to drop how much you burn from 2,000 to 1,500. So people talk about this because it's this metabolic rate, which is how much energy you're burning, now has gone down. And happens with dieting because you haven't watched what's happening with your hormones because you've kept the insulin too high. Now you use something like intermittent fasting, for example. where you allow insulin levels to fall. As you allow insulin levels to fall, you take away this block to fat burning and sugar burning. So now suppose you eat 1,500 calories because you dropped one meal. However, because you allow your insulin levels to fall, you can take 500 calories out of your fat stores. So you've got 1,500 in food, you got 500 from your body fat stores. So you don't have to drop the energy expend, the 2,000 calories. So therefore, that's exactly what you want to happen.